One of the little things I love in The Lord of the Rings is Dora Baggins' wastepaper basket. And you might be thinking, what in the world is that? Well, it is a very little thing, appearing just once and for a very brief moment at the end of the first chapter, A Long Expected Party. Bilbo Baggins has decided to celebrate his 111st birthday party in a unique way, with a party of special magnificence. Practically everybody living near was invited. A very few were overlooked by accident, but as they turned up all the same, that did not matter. Bilbo called it a party, but it was really a variety of entertainments rolled into one. There were songs, dances, music, games, and, of course, food and drink. There were 3 official meals: lunch, tea, and dinner, or supper. But lunch and tea were marked chiefly by the fact that, at those times, all the guests were sitting down and eating together. At other times, there were merely lots of people eating and drinking, continuously, from 11sies until 6:30, when the fireworks started. As part of the celebration, actually as part of any birthday celebration in the Shire, gifts were handed out. The prologue tells us that hobbits were hospitable and delighted in parties, and in presents, which they gave away freely and eagerly accepted. But the long-expected party chapter tells us how the hobbits do gift-giving a little differently. Hobbits give presents to other people on their own birthdays. Not very expensive ones, as a rule, and not so lavishly as on this occasion, but it was not a bad system. Actually, in Hobbiton and Bywater, every day in the year was somebody's birthday, so that every hobbit in those parts had a fair chance of at least one present at least once a week. Before the splendid supper for everyone who was invited to the party, and before Bilbo hosts the special family dinner party inside the pavilion under the illuminated party tree, at which he gives his birthday speech and disappears thanks to putting on the ring, we are told that Bilbo gave away presents to all and sundry. But there are many presents that he has left for distribution for after he goes away, which his heir and nephew Frodo has to deal with. The scene in Bag End the day after the party is described as follows. Inside the hall, there was piled a large assortment of packages and parcels and small articles of furniture. Every one of the various parting gifts had labels, written out personally by Bilbo, and several had some point, or some joke. Of these, we learn that Adelard took, for his very own, got an umbrella. Adelard, we are told, had carried off many unlabeled ones. And Milo Burrows got a gold pen and ink bottle, which Bilbo hopes will be useful, or so says his note. Milo never answered letters. And for Angelica's use, from Uncle Bilbo, on a round convex mirror. She was a young Baggins, and too obviously considered her face shapely, which, I would say, a convex mirror would tend to distort. And there was also, for the collection of Hugo Bracegirdle from a contributor, says Bilbo's message to him. This is on an empty bookcase, because Hugo was a great borrower of books, and worse than usual at returning them. The capper to this whole set, however, has to be for Lobelia Sackville-Baggins as a present on a case of silver spoons. Bilbo believed that she had acquired a good many of his spoons while he was away on his former journey. I like how the word present is in all caps, stressing its importance and declaring that these are being given and therefore not being stolen. It's safe to say that these gifts belong to the group which the text told us had some point or some joke, emphasis here on the joke aspect, the last one of which being the most pointed, I would say, and for which we actually get the reaction from the recipient. Lobelia knew quite well that Bilbo believed she had taken his spoons decades before. When she arrived later in the day, she took the point at once, but she also took the spoons. Of the others, we can only guess at what they thought and felt. But also, among the list of parting gifts is this one. for Dora Baggins in memory of a long correspondence. With love from Bilbo, on a large wastepaper basket. Dora was Drogo's sister and the eldest surviving female relative of Bilbo and Frodo. She was 99 and had written reams of good advice for more than half a century. And I always liked that part and pictured something rather decorative. We know nothing of Dora Baggins apart from her being 99 and apparently a prolific letter writer, but I always imagined her being a somewhat regal lady hobbit, worthy indeed of a very nice wastepaper basket. And I felt that way until I listened to the Tolkien professor Corey Olsen and his Exploring the Lord of the Rings podcast, begun in 2017. When he got to this moment, he approached the wastepaper basket in a way that I had never imagined. His take was that it too was one of those gifts which had some joke in it. To wit, is Bilbo saying, ponders Corey, when I think of you, I think of, like, the wastepaper basket? It does sound exactly like he's saying what she writes goes in the bin. Is the narrator being sarcastic? And that just never sat well with me. Not when I first heard it in 2017, and not now. And the reason for that, I would say, is mostly because of Isaac Asimov. Now, you may be thinking, what in the world does a science fiction legend, author of the Foundation series, The 3 Laws of Robotics, and The Complete Adventures of Lucky Starr, have to do with The Lord of the Rings? Well, apart from one of his mystery stories, from More Tales of the Black Widowers, that being Nothing Like Murder, then I would say absolutely nothing. Unless you want to talk about wastepaper baskets. And then we do have a connection. Because it is from one of Asimov's other mystery series, the Union Club Mysteries, that my understanding of the key aspects of the wastepaper basket in the writing process was formed. And I fear I must play spoiler a little bit with this story, but it's necessary to make the point. The story I'm talking about is called He Wasn't There. And the basics are that there is a missing man, gone from his apartment, which he apparently used for writing. But wait! Oh no, we're told. That apartment could never have been used for writing. It lacked the essential, our tale-teller Griswold says. You can write without a library and without reference books. You can write without a desk. You can write without a typewriter. You don't even have to have ordinary paper. You can write on the back of envelopes or on shopping bags or in the margins of newspapers. But, gentlemen, any writer will tell you that there is one object that no writer can possibly do without, and that object was not in the apartment. I told you everything that was in the apartment, and I didn't mention that object. But what was it? I demanded. Griswold's white mustache bristled. A wastepaper basket. How can a professional writer do without that? And I think it's appropriate now to quote a different Isaac, but also a writer, Isaac Bashevis Singer, who at one time noted that the wastebasket is the writer's best friend. And he said that, and Asimov based a whole story around the concept, for one specific reason. And any writer before the age of personal computers would know it. Because no matter what you are writing with, the odds of you getting your words perfect the first time you put them down is quite slim. And if you are working with a typewriter, as Asimov was, famously when asked what he would do if he learned he had 6 months to live, he said, "Type faster." Or if you are working with a quill pen, as our 99-year-old Dora Baggins surely was, what happens? You take your now useless piece of paper, crumple it up, and throw it where? Why, into a wastepaper basket, of course, as demonstrated thusly. With what Bilbo refers to as a long correspondence, note the use of all caps on the long, the emphasis clear, as well as the reams of good advice she put into that correspondence, I cannot see Dora Baggins as anything but a writer. She may not be the same kind of writer as Isaac Asimov, or Isaac Bashevis Singer, or Rob Petrie, or Tolkien himself. But that would only be in terms of what she put down on paper, not, I would say, in her process. Well, Tolkien seems never to have thrown anything away, much to his son Christopher's consternation at times, I'm certain. But for everyone else, when they rejected what they initially put down, they surely threw it out. And I can only see Dora Baggins doing the same. And after all, there is really no implication of a joke in what the gift is described as being. In memory of a long correspondence, with love from Bilbo, on a large wastepaper basket. She was 99 and had written reams of good advice for more than half a century. And it's not just any advice, but good advice. We don't get all caps here, but we also don't get useless advice or silly advice or pathetic advice. No, it's good. Bilbo also gives this gift with love. And if the reading of this wants to be sarcasm, the implication being that Bilbo was throwing out her reams of good advice, why would he give her the wastepaper basket? He surely would have wanted to keep it himself, or give it to others who might have been the recipients of that advice of hers. Unless he is saying she ought to throw it away the minute she writes it down, and not bother sending it, which I think would be unnecessarily cruel, none of which his other gifts are. And again, not all of Bilbo's gifts are given as jokes. The full text reads, "Every one of the various parting gifts had labels, written out personally by Bilbo, and several had some point or some joke. But, of course, most of the things were given where they would be wanted or welcome." A couple of key ones in that category are then given. Old Gaffer Gamgee got 2 sacks of potatoes, a new spade, a woolen waistcoat, and a bottle of ointment for creaking joints. And old Rory Brandybuck, in return for much hospitality, got a dozen bottles of old Wynyards, a strong red wine from the South Farthing, and now quite mature, as it had been laid down by Bilbo's father. More than those, though, it's also noted the poorer hobbits did very well, which is in keeping with what we had learned about Bilbo very early in this chapter, that he had many devoted admirers among the hobbits of poor and unimportant families. I really don't see any jokes there. Don't get me wrong, I think Bilbo has snark to spare. But he's saving that for where it would be the most useful, as in the case of Adelard and Milo and Angelica, Hugo, and, of course, Lobelia. In all the other cases, though, I see his sincerity shining through. And so, while I respect the Tolkien professor and love him to pieces, and have told him so too, I have to disagree with him here, which I suppose is fine since he has also admitted in a later Exploring the Lord of the Rings podcast, how many times have you gone back to something that you've said or wrote years ago, and you look at it and you're like, not only do I not agree with that, but I can't imagine how I ever thought that. I like to think that he's rethought this one. Bottom line, I have believed and will always believe that the wastepaper basket given to Dora Baggins was indeed given with the love that Bilbo says of it, and given where it would be wanted and welcome. And I have no doubt that Dora appreciated it. Alas, that she was only able to do so for another few years, as the Baggins family tree in the appendices tells us that she passed away in Shire Reckoning 1406, the birthday party being in 1401. One can only hope it was useful for that time, and she thought fondly of Bilbo every time she dropped a crumpled page into it. And that is why Dora Baggins' wastepaper basket is one of the little things that I love in The Lord of the Rings. Thank you for listening, and have a wonderful day.